Hi, I'm Dr. Faisel Syed. Welcome to another episode of Faisel and Friends. We're here because we believe everyone deserves access to quality primary care, and ChenMed needs physicians to take care of them. Today's topic is evidence, the backbeat of clinical jazz. My co-host and moderator of the chat, Dr. Dan McCarter. Dr. Dan, how are you?
I'm great, Faisal. It's good to be here with you this evening.
It's great to have you here. You have had quite a busy couple of days.
That's right. That's right. Got to go visit with the family medicine department at the University of Cincinnati. They're doing some really interesting ways of training their new interns. So I got to spend the afternoon with their new interns yesterday. That was pretty cool.
Wonderful, wonderful. And our friend for the evening tonight, we have David Slawson. David, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Welcome, Faisal. Welcome, my old friend Dan. Thank you. I'm glad to be invited. Thank you very much. Or I'm honored, actually.
Wonderful. Most of our audience they're primary care doctors, people who are passionate about healthcare outside of the fee-for-service system. So it's direct primary care doctors, value-based care doctors. And so this past year with the pandemic, there's concern about evidence. And did the pandemic negatively impact how evidence is relayed to the public and to physicians?
Yeah, Faisal, I kind of heard that too. So just to give a little brief thing on my background, my colleague and I, Alan Shaughnessy, have probably really for the last 25 or 30 years worked at what we call information mastery, which has always been sort of our primary care spin on. Initially, it was critical appraisal, and then it was evidence-based medicine, and now, at least over in Europe, it's more evidence-informed decision making. But it's really been on the whole concept of in medicine, we've always had evidence. I mean, nobody ever makes decisions based on just flipping a coin. At least we hope
Sure.
they don't.
Yeah.
But we've always had evidence to some extent. But it's always been about how do you look at the evidence and how do you evaluate the evidence and how do you know which evidence is most trustworthy. We always used our information mastery equation that usefulness of information equals how relevant the information is, how valid the information is, and then divided by how much work it takes to get the information. So if you have relevant information, but it's not valid, 0 times anything is 0. If you have valid information, but it's not relevant, it's still useless. If you have both relevant and valid information, but it takes 20, 30 minutes to find it, it's also useless when people are seeing patients. So it was always this concept of can we design information systems that make it so that clinicians can, like a flowing river that's always changing. The body of evidence is always changing. Can we set up systems where they will be able to make decisions based on the highest quality information at that point in time, and that they'll be able to access it in really like less than a minute or so. So we've spent our whole career really working on that. We think we've done really well with that. Now the pandemic was an interesting time because we were dealing with problems that we really didn't have a lot of experience with, and we didn't know what we could do with them. And so I think what ended up really happening was decisions were made on low quality evidence. As a result, we found out later on that they weren't always the best decisions. And so the right thing to do is not to doubt evidence, but just to recognize again how important it is to realize where do you get the most useful evidence from. A lot of it was not relevant because it wasn't really focusing on what we call patient-oriented outcomes, and very little of it was valid, or was based on just a couple case series, or a couple cases that somebody had. Give somebody hydroxychloroquine and they got better. That's not exactly a randomized trial. And during the pandemic, you wouldn't have time to do that. Although it was interesting, they did do some really pretty great research in some pretty quick time. And that was probably one of the most beautiful things about the pandemic was it brought people together and they really worked hard to do good trials in a relatively quick time. But because there was so much motivation and desire to work together and do it. Sorry, that's probably a long answer to your question, but
Yeah, well, Dave, I'm going to jump in here. So it was. eh, I wonder. I know residents often get taught how to evaluate articles, but then it's not something they do every day. It's sort of like putting in central lines, right? You got pretty good at it as a resident, but I wouldn't begin to think about putting in a central line in somebody today. Um, so you have, I mean, I remember you having a philosophy about how people should stay fresh, right? I think you remember you used to talk about the bread store and how do you get the fresh bread. And I mean, I was impressed during COVID with your essential evidence page on COVID. Is that I mean, your group's essential evidence page that was getting updated on a very regular basis, and that was a place I trusted because I knew you all were actually looking at the how relevant the data was and how valid it was, and so I could trust what you all were saying. Do you think doctors know where to go for the evidence?
yeah, I mean, Danny, that's one of our frustrations. I mean, you mentioned like the clinicians, we teach them in their training how to read articles, how to critically evaluate them, and the reality is out in the real world, nobody can do it. I mean, you got the New England Journal of Medicine, you got JAMA, you got Lancet, you got BMJ, you got the Annals of Internal Medicine, you got all the JAMA spin-off journals, you got European journals. Um, there isn't even a specialist anywhere who can read every week those 5 journals, all the articles in them, and then read the clinical epidemiology articles and how to read the articles. Um, we Danny, we talked about like there's 7 levels of blinding in a clinical trial. And the 2 most important ones are allocation concealment and judicial assessor of outcomes. Most people don't even know what I'm just talking about. So we've got like we talked about like 4 levels of information proficiency that people can operate at. Level 0 is basically you make decisions based on being influenced by advertising, which a lot of clinicians really do that much more often than they want to admit. Level 1 is you make decisions based on the best information available. Level 2 is you critically evaluate information and help creating tools for the level 1 people. And then level 3, you're actually involved in clinical trials. So the goal is to get people to level 1, not level 2. Level 2 is critically reading the literature, but people can't do that. If they don't learn level 1, they fall back to level 0. And I think that's what we have a lot today is a lot of primary care clinicians were taught as residents are being taught to do level 2, but what's happening, they go out and practice, they can't do it, and they fall back to level 0. And instead, they need to be learning how to use point of care tools, what we call hunting and foraging tools. And they need to learn how to tell quality evidence from not so quality evidence. In other words, how to evaluate secondary sources and use those and make sure that the ones they're using are the best. So that's been our approach to how we've trained people with the whole information mastery approach.
That's a great point. And Joy Kumar brings up a comment here. The evidence for evidence is it is overflowing. Need to pare it down to make sure it's not conflicting. Or I might paraphrase it and say you need to find the right funnel. Essential evidence or Dynamed that actually give you that we know we're doing critical appraisal of the literature rather than just expert opinion.
Right. Yeah. No, that's the thing is, we look at we figured out we look at 150 journals a month, about 8,000 articles a month, and we ask the 3 questions of every article: is this an outcome that a patient would care about? Is it common to primary care? And if this information has a high probability of being valid, if it's true, would it require somebody to change their practice? And we get less than 10 of those a month. Out of 8,000 articles, there's only 10 that really are relevant for primary care. And of course, we write those up as poems every month. And that pares it down incredible.